Some stories don't disappear with time. Welcome back to A Tribute from Hollywood, where we honor the American stars we've recently lost and the global figures whose influence echoed across generations. If preserving these legacies matters to you, your support helps us keep these memories alive with the respect they deserve. The blues community is mourning a loss that many outside it may not fully understand. Bobby Murray passed away at 72. A guitarist who never needed a marquee to matter. The people who truly understood music, they always knew. Word came through those who were closest to the sounds he helped build. No fanfare, no drama, just a deep and quiet ache that something unshakable has now shifted. If the voice of Etta James ever found you, through a record player, a late-night radio station, or a smoky corner bar where the band felt almost too intimate, then Bobby Murray was already in your life, whether you knew his name or not. For 23 years, he stood at her side. Not in the spotlight, not seeking applause, just grounded and present. His guitar filled the silences her voice left behind, and it did so with a kind of grace that didn't announce itself. He wasn't interested in individual recognition. He was part of something larger. Those Grammy-winning sessions alongside B.B. King and Etta weren't just professional achievements, they were moments that embedded themselves in people's memories without them even realizing it. A particular tone. A certain warmth. That was him. Born in 1953, long before the world would know his name, he carried the blues as if it were something he had inherited in the blood. No performance, no posturing, just the work. Night after night, studio after studio. And perhaps that's what people will hold on to. Not accolades or album sales, but that unwavering steadiness. The kind of presence you don't notice you depended on until the day it simply isn't there anymore. Because time has a way of accelerating without warning. And the people whose music quietly shaped our lives begin to slip away. Not all together, but enough to leave a mark. The news arrived gently this time. Don Schlitz has died at 73. Not a face most people would recognize on the street, but his words, those were everywhere. The confirmation came from Nashville's inner circles, people who understood precisely the weight of what had been lost. Not just a songwriter, but a craftsman of human truth. Someone who could say something plain-spoken and still have it echo for decades. If you were alive in the late 70s and 80s, you remember the first time The Gambler reached you. Kenny Rogers gave it a voice in 1978, no question. But that wisdom, that worn and weathered philosophy, it was born from Schlitz, a man still in his 20s when he wrote something that felt ancient. Know when to hold M. That line never felt like a lyric. It felt like something a grandfather pressed into your palm. And that was just the beginning. Over 20 #1 songs. Pause on that figure. That's not a streak of fortune. That's a lifetime of paying attention to people, to their regrets, their quiet triumphs, the feelings they couldn't put words to themselves. He never chased the spotlight. Nashville knew him as patient, deliberate, the kind of man who absorbed more than he spoke. His family came first. After that, his craft. There's a particular kind of grief that comes with losing someone like him. The realization that so much of your own story, the songs that were playing at weddings, at funerals, on long drives going nowhere, all of it traces back to one man you never thought to look up. And those words remain. Still playing on radios, still meaning something, while the person who carefully chose each one quietly takes his leave. Some people carry a presence that stays with you long after the moment has passed. Gwen Verrell had that quality. And now she's gone at 93. The news came the way it tends to with people of a certain stature, not with noise, but with a slow and settling recognition that someone who had been a constant in the background of many lives simply wasn't there anymore. If you ever sat down to watch MASH, and most people did at some point, you may remember her. Not always the center of the frame, but grounded, authentic, the kind of face that felt like it genuinely belonged in that world. Earlier, in Billy Jack, she carried that same quiet authority. Nothing manufactured, nothing performed for effect. But her life refused to stay within a single lane. That's the part that catches people off guard. Acting, and then stepping into professional boxing, not as a prop, not as a novelty act, but as a licensed referee. Real bouts, real pressure, real authority. A woman commanding spaces that weren't always prepared to receive her, particularly in that era. Her roots were unusual in their own right. Her mother, Lovey Yancey, built something that would become an institution, Fatburger, a different arena, a different kind of determination. And somehow Gwen absorbed both that discipline and a fierce independence into everything she pursued. That may explain why she always seemed so settled in herself. Like someone who had already done enough living to know exactly who she was. Now she becomes part of that quieter history, not forgotten, just belonging to a time that can't be fully revisited. South Texas never tried to charm anyone. It simply was. Flat stretches of land, relentless heat, and a kind of stillness that teaches a boy to listen long before he learns to speak what he's feeling. George Strait grew up inside that silence. Born May 18, 1952 in Poteet, it was Pearsall where life really shaped him. His father worked a cattle ranch. The days were long and the air was dry. There was no applause at the end of anything, only duty and repetition. His mother left while he was still a child. No drawn-out explanation, just her absence. And that kind of absence doesn't disappear. It settles in. It sits across from you at the dinner table. It teaches a boy not to ask too many questions. So he didn't. He observed. He watched how men in his world handled pain, by folding it into their routines. He noticed how music, when it came on, said the things that no one around him would say out loud. At Pearsall High School, he wasn't dreaming of stages. Football mattered more. Steadiness mattered more. Being the kind of person who didn't need to explain himself, that was what he was after. But something was taking shape underneath, without announcement. After graduation, college briefly entered the picture. It didn't hold. So he did what many young men did in that era, he enlisted. The army gave him structure, distance, and the unusual gift of time without having to call it that. He was stationed in Hawaii, far from Texas, far from anything recognizable. And that's where music found its way back to him. No ambition attached, no career plan. Just a guitar and songs that made him feel closer to home than anything physically around him. He joined a group called Rambling Country, played small local gigs, and something quietly clicked. Not a dramatic realization. More like coming across a language he had always spoken but never had occasion to use. Hawaii eventually receded. Texas called him back, the way it always does, with no raised voice. He returned steadier than he'd left. And waiting in that steadiness was someone who had known him before any of it. Norma. High school. Uncomplicated. Life had pulled them apart as it does, but not everything that leaves stays gone. In 1971, they found their way back to each other and married in Mexico. No ceremony, no spectacle, just a choice that felt correct. That decision became the foundation for everything that followed. He enrolled at Southwest Texas State University, studying agriculture rather than music. Music was still something personal, almost guarded. But nights had a way of drawing it out of him. Small bars, local dance halls, rooms full of people who weren't looking for a star, just something honest. And in those rooms, he began to stand apart. Not because he was louder. Because he wasn't. While other artists chased the crossover sound seeping into country music through the late 70s, he held his ground. Traditional steel guitar. Fiddle. Songs that didn't dress up to impress, they just told the truth. He formed the ace in the whole band, played every venue that would have them, drove long distances, loaded his own gear, took no shortcuts and entertained no shortcuts. And still, the industry turned him away. Record labels passed. Repeatedly. They weren't hearing it, or they didn't believe others would. That kind of sustained rejection can hollow a person out, push them toward becoming something they're not. He didn't change. He kept arriving with the same sound, the same calm, the same stubbornness. Then in 1981, something gave. MCA Records took a modest chance on him. The result was Unwound. It didn't explode. But it was different in a way people noticed, not all at once, but steadily. It reached number 6 on Billboard's Hot Country Songs, and that was enough to open a door that had been shut for years. He didn't run through it. He walked through at his own pace. His debut album, Straight Country, released that same year, made no attempt to reinvent the wheel. That was exactly its power. While the urban cowboy movement was nudging country towards something slicker, he pulled in the opposite direction, back toward roots, back toward songs that felt lived in. Audiences responded. By 1982, Fool-Hearted Memory reached #1. The first of many. But even then, nothing visibly changed in him. No new persona, no reinvention narrative. Just more shows, larger venues, longer roads. The stretch that followed would define him quietly. Albums stacking, hits accumulating without noise. Amarillo by Morning, in 1983, it didn't reach the top of the charts, but it stayed anyway, the way certain songs do, in a place charts don't measure. By the mid-80s, his voice had become something familiar to American households, not overpowering, not theatrical. Just present. But life doesn't bend around success. In 1986, something shattered that no amount of success could touch. His daughter Jennifer, just 13, was killed in a car accident. There are no headlines that hold a loss like that. And he didn't try to make it fit into a public narrative. No interviews unpacking his grief. No prolonged public statement. He stepped back. He chose the same silence he had learned as a boy, except now, it weighed differently. He returned to music slowly, carefully. Songs like Baby Blue carried something interior, not proclaimed, just present. Audible if you were paying attention. Not grief performed for an audience, but grief that had settled into the music and stayed there. And through it all, the sound that people had come to trust, it didn't fracture. It just held more inside it. He didn't reconstruct his life through talk. He reconstructed it by continuing. Into the late 80s and through the 90s, something quietly remarkable happened. The industry kept evolving, new artists, bigger productions, shifting sounds. He remained exactly where he had always stood. And rather than being left behind, he grew. One song at a time. Albums like Ocean Front Property in 1987 and Beyond the Blue Neon in 1989 didn't feel like career moves. They felt like a natural continuation. By 1992, Pure Country became more than a film soundtrack, it became a cultural moment. I Cross My Heart didn't age the way trends do. It stayed. And so did he. There's something genuinely hard to articulate about the space he occupied. No scandals keeping his name circulating. No desperate pivots to stay current. Just consistency, year after year, decade following decade. That kind of longevity usually comes with detachment from an audience. Not here. He stayed close to the people who had grown up with him. People who never needed spectacle. Just something real. Away from stages, life remained grounded. His son George Jr., Bubba, became a collaborator. Writing together. Passing something forward without framing it as a transition. Time moved. Recognition stacked up. More than 60 #1 hits. A record that doesn't invite easy comparison. Induction into the Country Music Hall of Fame in 2006. Formal acknowledgement that finally matched what listeners had felt for 30 years. Even then, no shift in manner. No ceremony changed him. Today, he moves between his Texas land and stages that still draw thousands. Not chasing relevance. Not making a case for himself. Just showing up when it feels right. And for the people who have carried his music with them across decades, that presence still means something. Steady. Unhurried. Still there. Some voices don't need volume to reach you. Beverley Martyn has died at 79. And for those who belong to that era, it feels like a quiet lamp going dark somewhere in the corner of a room you loved. The news spread the way it tends to in folk circles, among musicians, among old friends, in the language of people who understood exactly what had been part of their world and was now gone. If you spent any real time with British folk music in the late 60s and 70s, her presence was woven through it. Not always the loudest thread, but essential. Working alongside John Martin, in music and in life, and sharing space with figures like Jimmy Page and Richard Thompson. It was never about recognition. It was about being present at the formation of something that mattered. Her voice held a softness that also contained strength, the kind that doesn't feel the need to announce itself. You could hear it in the patience with which she carried a song. No urgency, no forcing. Just the song unfolding at its own pace. Her life wasn't uncomplicated, and anyone who followed her even lightly understood that. There were hard chapters. Personal struggles. Crossroads where pulling away entirely might have been easier. But she stayed connected to music in her own way, on her own terms. And perhaps that's what stays with people now. Not the collaborations or the catalog, but the sense of someone who was always genuinely herself. Never performing a version of herself for the room. Because time keeps moving, and one by one, the voices that gave those years their texture begin to fade. Not entirely. But enough that the silence they leave becomes something you can actually feel. David Allan Coe was never interested in being polished, and that was always the whole point. He has died at 86. For a particular generation, it feels like the last truly unvarnished voice in the room has finally gone quiet. Word came through Nashville in the usual understated way, no theatrical send-off. Just the kind of news that holds your attention a beat longer than expected. If you were around in the 70s and 80s, you didn't just listen to Coe, you had a reaction to him. Sometimes that reaction was admiration. Sometimes it was confusion. Sometimes it was all of it at once. Songs like "You Never Even Called Me by My Name" carried humor and defiance and a kind of rawness that didn't ask for approval. It either connected with you or it didn't. He wrote more than 280 songs over the course of his life. That number is large, but it also misses the point, because Coe was never building toward a tidy legacy. He leaned deliberately into the rough edges, the stories that weren't made for radio, the corners of country music that the industry preferred to leave dark. That's where opinions come in, and have always come in. Not everyone embraced what he offered. Some turned away. Others found something genuine in the disorder. That tension never left him. It followed his entire career like a shadow he made no effort to outrun. Still, any honest conversation about outlaw country eventually finds him somewhere in the background. Not always at the front, but always present. And now that voice, unruly, stubborn, impossible to sand down into something comfortable, moves into memory. Not easy to categorize. Not easy to replace. Simply no longer in the room where it once refused to be quiet.